Americans' views of politics are low and have been decreasing since maybe the 70s, which we could see if these graphs went back further in time. People like to complain that politicians don't care about them and elections don't change what is happening in the country. And they are right, at least about that second part. Where they go off the rails is in their interpretation of the causal factual nexus that leads to this mess. The politically idiotic man on the street, the common man, the little guy, the salt-of-the-earth imbecile who does not know the difference between the House and the Senate, that guy imagines that there are shadowy elites who conspire to fuck him over. In pursuing their ulterior motives, they pay, bribe, or extort politicians who lie to their constituents about doing X, but then intentionally do Y because the shadowy elites will benefit from it, either monetarily or maybe measured in adrenochrome. They all meet in secret gatherings where they commit all kinds of sexual immoralities and laugh about and look down on you, while they plan how to exploit the common man, the little guy on the street salting his earth. The average political event in this person's mind is that a pharmaceutical CEO pays off the head of a regulatory agency with promises of future employ so that he looks the other way when the CEO's company dumps toxic waste into the river that flows through Little Cork, Arkansas, where little Susie and little Timmy will develop previously unheard of congenital diseases because their little mother had to drink the polluted tap water because she was working 5 jobs simultaneously to afford healthcare. But now the insurance won't pay. The pharma CEO and health insurance CEO meet in some country club and laugh about her because they knew this would happen but went ahead with it anyway because they value their profits over people. The insurance CEO personally denied the mother's claim with great satisfaction, imagining she would have to take on 13 more jobs to pay for the healthcare of her disabled children. The guy doing the unemployment numbers is sitting next to the two CEOs, also rubbing his hands, thinking to himself, now I will be able to say that the US is at full employment, even though I know many people are unemployed, which is made up by the indigent, innocent mothers working 24 jobs to support their dying children. All three are patting the House representative of their district and the state senator on the back for pushing through the Allow Pharmaceutical Companies to Do Evil Shit to Mothers Act. They are all lighting cigars on fire with $100 bills drenched in the blood of African children who died in cobalt mines. They weren't mining, that's just where they like to kill kids. And this is why the potholes in your street don't get filled, and why the cops are forcing black people to commit crimes, and why fascism is on the rise, and why communists are indoctrinating your children in public schools, and why poor people get fat but also live in food deserts, and why the frogs are gay. People intentionally collude to make your life worse and exploit you. None of this is true. Well, maybe there really are potholes in their street, but they aren't not getting filled because of shadowy cabals. In reality, politicians running for Congress are in good faith when they make campaign promises. They try hard to make changes accordingly once in Washington, and only comically large amounts of money could convince them not to pursue those changes. In reality, elected officials and even elected majorities are simply unable to enact changes because of the institutional arrangements of the US government. That's why individual elections don't matter in the US. The crux of the issue is that there are too many veto players, so every decision the legislative machinery spits out is some kind of unpredictable compromise between majority and minority opinion, changing the status quo then requiring large supermajorities. Let's say things are messed up and you Google who runs the United States. You find out the president is in charge. So at the next presidential election, you vote for the other guy running on an agenda entirely opposed to the current guy. Landslide win, 90% of the vote for your guy. You voted yellow. Clearly, he has a mandate to enact his agenda. The new president writes a bill exactly to your liking, denying any lobbying influence, not being paid off by anyone. The bill arrives in Congress and immediately dies in committee in both chambers. Unfortunately, the majority parties are not of the president's party and have different policy preferences. And how could you tell them that they should pass the president's agenda just because he has a mandate? All representatives, after all, too have a mandate. All of them were elected. They plausibly, in good faith, believe they represent an elected majority, and they may be right. No one is really at fault here. So you learn from your mistake. Next presidential election, you vote down ballot for the president's party to take Congress as well. Another landslide. 90% for your president, and his party gets 90% of votes for the House and Senate. The president and the representatives were able to coordinate on a consensus position before the election to run on, and now surely they will be able to enact that agenda, he said cluelessly. They write an optimally balanced bill, zero lobbying influence, evil CEOs taking another L. They telepathically tap into the minds of their constituents to write the bill. A huge working group of presidential aides, House representatives and senators work day and night on this bill. It passes the House with a 90% majority and it immediately dies in committee in the Senate. What happened? While 90% of senatorial votes went to the president's party, only 33 seats were up for election, as always. Unfortunately, before the election, the Senate was 71-29 against the president and his party. 90% of 33 is about 30, so the president's party now has 59 seats in the Senate. A robust majority, but not enough to overcome the filibuster. A minority senator signaled his intent to filibuster the telepathically written bill, and that killed it. Whoops. Everyone tried their hardest to do what they were elected to do. No conspiracy, no lobbyists, no bribery, yet they did not deliver. And what will you tell the minority in the Senate that blocked the proposal? Stand back and then lose your seat in the next election when your constituents vote you out for not blocking the bill? No one is really at fault here. But we learn from our mistakes, the next election comes along and we vote extra hard for the Senate. Landslide. House is 90% your party and the Senate is 66% your party. Enough to defeat the filibuster. Unfortunately, you forgot about the president, who is now not your guy anymore. Never mind, a congressperson proposes another even better telepathically written bill. It passes both chambers with huge majorities and the president vetoes it. Overcoming a presidential veto requires 2/3 majorities in both chambers, but the Senate can only muster a 66% majority, not 67%. And what are you going to tell the president? This is the inverse of the first situation. So if the president had a mandate then not to listen to majorities in Congress, now in this situation, his behavior of vetoing what Congress did seems justified. The president is independently elected by a majority, usually, and can plausibly, in good faith, believe that he represents the country. No one is really at fault here. Jumping out of the narrative account to speed this up, so far I went through 2 or 3 veto players. The President and Congress, which itself is split into 2 veto players. Technically, these institutional actors are also agenda setters. Veto players can only prevent outcomes from moving away from them, but clearly Congress and the President can move outcomes closer to their position. A more narrowly vetoing veto player is the Supreme Court. It isn't particularly powerful in creating policy on its own. For example, racial desegregation was enforced via the Civil Rights Act and not the earlier Warren Court rulings, but it can block movements away from its policy position. The Federal Election Campaign Act and the associated agency, the FEC, are essentially unable to regulate spending on political campaigns because of court cases like Buckley v. Vallejo from 1976 and McCutcheon v. FEC from 2014. Another collection of veto players are the states. The US has unusually strong federalism, meaning the states have a lot of power compared to other federal systems, which can undermine federal initiatives backed by majorities. For example, the ACA expanded Medicaid to less poor people, as in more people, but they are less poor, with the federal government covering 90% of the costs, but about a dozen states opted out of this, after SCOTUS ruled the program optional, meaning a couple million low-income people are not covered by that policy. These 5 are the big ones: President, House, Senate, Supreme Court, and states. But there is a lot more sand in the gears of the governmental machine, causing policy gridlock. Weak parties mean individual representatives have much more divergent goals than in the parliamentary systems that exist in Europe. The governors in the states have even stronger veto powers than the president. Amendments to the constitution require 3/4 of the states, which makes them almost impossible nowadays. Quirks of Congress can prevent policies from moving forward. The power of committee chairs and the double responsibility of the substantive committees and the appropriations committee, for example. And the air quotes deep state in the wider sense, encompassing also the courts and rules-making agencies, significantly affect implementation of most laws. Why did the institutional setup that has existed for centuries only recently led to political apathy? Well, for the longest time, there simply was no intricately developed government to have expectations of, and universal suffrage is not much older. The current complexity of the US government is a result of the New Deal legislation of the 30s, the national security expansion after World War II, and LBJ's Great Society program of the 60s. Similarly, none of the roadblocks and vetoes matter if politics isn't highly polarized. For the longest time, legislation in Congress was divided into the fiefdoms of committees, led by powerful chairs who got into their position by seniority. Meetings were closed and committees granted each other broad latitude, so here we are talking about literal backroom negotiations among fairly entrenched elites that collude with each other. This started to change in the 70s, leading to clearer fronts between the Democrats and Republicans, less powerful committees, and policymaking dominated by party leadership rather than committee chairs. All of this was good, but it also led the US into the current political climate of fairly acerbic rhetoric and obstructionism in Congress. So now we're in a situation where nobody is at fault when things don't get fixed. Everyone can genuinely point the finger at someone else and say, I tried, but that guy got in the way. A majority of people with good motivations is not enough. You need large supermajorities in multiple institutions that all coordinate on the same goal. We're also in a situation where nobody knows what the outcome of any single election will be, since no one actor can do anything, and the necessary compromises that will result are unpredictable. That's why it feels like elections in the US don't do anything. Individually, they in fact don't. But this is not because of a permanent class of elites rigging the system in their favor. This setup doesn't systematically work in anyone's favor. There are ways to fix this, but that is a story for another day.